Right, good morning, members. It is, I looked at my clock and it is precisely 10 o'clock, so our clock is running to time as well. Welcome to Exmoor National Park Authority meeting of Tuesday the 7th of March. Right, we will start with item 1, apologies for absence. I have quite a list of apologies here. Dominic Elson, Steve Griffiths, Eric Lay, Andy Milne, John Petrinos, Susan Warren, Penny Webber and Vivian White. I have been told, just for information from members, that Vivian is quite seriously ill at the moment. So I wish him all the best anyway. We will move on. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any members have any declarations of interest? Thank you very much. And any lobbying by anyone? No. Thank you. On that, bearing in mind that we are moving, apologies, I still haven't quite got my voice 100% back. Bearing in mind that we're moving on to the finance side in a moment, I will declare that I have had multiple phone calls from people regarding the direction the authority is going, particularly with its land holdings and so on. That's become quite a focus of interest from an awful lot of people at the moment externally. Item 3, chairperson's announcements. Right, I have quite a list today. So, further to formation of the Somerset Unitary Authority. I believe this will be the last meeting for Nick Thwaites. He's and Andy Milne, Andy Milne left us last time. I believe, he's still a member, but it will officially be his last meeting here. And Steve Griffiths, as their Somerset West and Taunton appointed members. So, just place on record, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. It's very welcome and of great value to the authority. We also now have confirmation from Somerset Unitary Authority that, much to the relief of a couple of members here, I would think, that Stephen will now sit as a Somerset Council appointee to the authority, and along with Marcus Kravis, Christine Lawrence, Francis Nicholson and Fran Smith, they will continue. Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to hear it. We have 3 new Somerset Council appointees to join us in April, now confirmed as Lee Baker from Taunton North, Mandy Chilcott from Minehead and Theo Butt-Phillip from Wells. So, following their induction and so on, they will be joining us as voting members of the authority. We'll look forward to their contributions. I thought I'd probably just like to note, a good many of you will remember or know of Robert Dean, who was instrumental in the Exmoor Ambition work and everything. Sadly, Robert passed away suddenly, a little while ago. And the Hill Farm Network sent quite a substantial group of people to the Thanksgiving service and so on last week. And just like to say, you know, from Robert's point of view, he gave an awful lot to Exmoor in the varying publications that he put together. My mind goes back quite a long time. The Moorland papers and so on that were my first sort of feelings around, rural focus activity. And from then on, he was engaged quite a lot. Just asked Sarah to say a few things a little bit more.
Thank you, Robin. No, it's really sad news. Robert was only 58. I'd known Robert for at least 20 years, and we discovered when we were chatting one day that we both went to the same university and we both did the same degree. He got a first, which was incredibly unusual. I can tell you, I didn't know anybody who got a first. He was a very, very bright man, really clear thinker. He worked for FWAG, he worked for the NFU, he worked for Land Use Consultants, became a director, and then set up Rural Focus. And I was going back through and all the great reports, all the really good analytical studies that we were involved with. There was the Exmoor Landscape Assessment, there was Moorlands at a Crossroads, the Moorland Landscape Partnership, Exmoor Ambition, Exmoor Natural Capital Register. Almost every one of those really good reports, Robert was in there summer, and of course most recently helping to manage the Exmoor Hill Farming Network. So we will really miss him. He was a great thinker, he was a lovely man, and he was a great mentor to so many people. So just like to recognise his great contribution to Exmoor.
Thanks, Sarah, very much. Someone who will be very definitely missed in the background for activities for our policy work on land management. Now on to a little bit of better news. Confirmation has been received from DEFRA of a flat cash grant allocation for 23 to 24. It's an additional 440,000 in supplementary funding for each National Park Authority. And we may, during members' forum later, have a little bit more discussion around that, but that is good news. It is a one-off allocation, so it's not a long-term bailout, I regret to say. And one last item, and he probably won't thank me for this, and I'm not quite sure, it's not quite authority business, but since he's quite influential in the direction the authority goes. Happy birthday, Gordon. It's 50, is it? Yeah, 50. It is. Right. We will move on. Item 4. To approve as a correct records the minutes of the meeting of the authority held on the 7th of February. Before we move to that, please note the request Jeremy Payne to adjust the record for minute 117 in relation to the statement read out on his behalf at the meeting. Mr. Payne's request states, I signed it in my capacity of chair of Orr and Colbone Parish meeting, but if the record could be adjusted, I would prefer for it to be attributed to me, Jeremy James Seifert Payne, as a neighbour, seeing as no official parish meeting to discuss the issue was ever convened. I have had discussion. I think we should approve the minutes. We cannot adjust the official minutes or record of the meeting, in my opinion, but we can add a note as a matter arising to those minutes. So, to approve the record of the meeting. Mike and Andrea, thank you. And to consider the matters arising. That adjustment or addition as a matter arising, as a matter of record to set it straight. Can I have a proposal? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrea and Mike. We will run through then, having dealt with that, the minutes as per usual, when I get the right page, of course. And page 1, page 2, page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and page 8. Thank you, members. Public speaking. I don't think we have any public speaking, do we, Judy? And as there is no planning section either to this meeting, we will then move on to item 6. Gareth Mills is there ready and waiting from Grant Thornton to join us. And I will hand over to Gordon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So it's great today that we've got Gareth Mills from Grant Thornton with us, and he will talk us through the audit findings report for the year 21-22, and this, of course, includes the value for money station. Thank you, Gareth.
Thanks very much, Gordon, and many happy returns. Morning, Chair and other members. So yes, as Gordon said, I will take you through our annual auditor's report. It's a summary of the review of value for money arrangements at the authority, and I guess it's the second key part of our audit work. So obviously we did the work on your financial accounts last year, signed off on the 2nd of December. That audit progressed well, with a clean audit opinion issued. And then this is the other part of our work, which is the review of value for money arrangements. So you'll see in the report, again, the detailed review takes place across 3 particular themes. That's financial sustainability, governance, and then, arrangements to improve economy, efficiency and effectiveness, or effectively looking at your sort of performance management and delivery of your sort of key objectives and partnerships. And as a result of that work, we can issue potential recommendations to, I guess, improve or enhance the processes in place at an authority. So those are on a hierarchy from the lowest level of recommendation, which is called an improvement recommendation, which is really just trying to finesse and enhance what you're already doing. And then there's a more serious level one called a key recommendation, where that effectively an auditor is suggesting there's a significant weakness in an authority's arrangements. And then the real sort of nuclear option is the statutory recommendations, but they're typically at the local authorities that you could probably all name from being in the headlines over recent months. Just to be really clear, at Exmoor, we haven't issued any of the sort of 2 higher level recommendations. So there's no statutory recs, no key recommendations, and there's just the 1 improvement recommendation this year, which is really around just sort of enhancing the medium-term financial strategy in terms of drawing out the level of reserves going forward, should the savings requirements not be achieved. We have also, as you'll see in the report, followed up the 7 recommendations that we raised this time last year. Pleased to say that the ones that you could have actioned in time for the particular year of review, you have done, and then ones that could only really be action from 23-24. We know plans are in place to do that from discussions with Gordon, so we anticipate that when we follow this up again next year, or later this year, should I say, that those will be implemented as well. So I think in summary, without sort of turning the pages, because I'm taking it as that you've all read the document, Chair, I think it's a positive report for the authority. As I say, just the 1 recommendation arising. Good action has been taken against the 7 recommendations that we raised last year. We do note in there, notwithstanding the announcement you just made, Chair, around the National Park grant, that it's potentially a challenging financial position going forward. Obviously, Gordon's fully aware of that, and is looking at taking appropriate action off the back of it, and that'll be something that we look at, I guess, in a bit more detail as part of our 22-23 VFM work later this year. But overall, I'd say a positive report for you as a national park. It's pretty much the other 2 national parks, just by way of a bit of comparison and benchmarking, and we continue to have a good professional working relationship with Gordon and colleagues, and had a good level of engagement in this particular piece of work, hence why it was concluded pretty smoothly after Christmas. So I'll pause at that point, Chair, but obviously happy to take any questions you other members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. Members, any questions on the audit report? Or as is usual, Gordon has dealt with all of those for us before they've got to this stage.
Yeah.
Chair, I will draw attention in the budget papers to some of the changes that have been introduced as a result of recommendations that were made from previous years from the auditors.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gordon.
And
I think, Gareth, the one comment I would make is you're slightly more optimistic than me if you say it's potentially challenging financial position in the future.
Yes, indeed.
I would be a little bit clear. I personally think it is a challenging position at the moment.
Yeah.
And will remain so for the foreseeable future anyway.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's fair, Chair.
So,
I think the only final point I'd make, Chair, if I may, is that the last bit of our audit requirement is to issue the audit certificate, which effectively closes off the 21-22 audit in full. And now that we've concluded the VFM work and the authority is outside of the requirements of the whole of government accounts process, I will be issuing my audit certificate, I would think, later this afternoon and sending that through to Gordon, so that will fully box off 21-22, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Gordon, anything to add? Members, we have two things under this item. First is to receive and note the draft minutes of the Final Accounts Committee held on the 1st of December. And the second, to receive and note the Auditor's Annual Report Review of Value for Money for the year ended 31st of March 2022. Can I have a proposal, please? Stephen.
Before you do, on 6A, could I just note that I made my apologies, not my wife,
All right.
at the meeting on the...
Yes.
She does a lot of things for me, but she didn't do that.
Thank you, Stephen. So, can I have a subject to that?
Chairman, I'm happy to propose.
Proposed, seconded by Evelyn. Stacey. Thank you. And thank you, Gareth, for that. Very much appreciated, and look forward to our continuing relationship with you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks all, and hope the rest of the meeting goes well. Cheers, Gordon. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
And we move to item 7, the medium-term financial plan. Gordon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, as mentioned, there are a few changes to sort of structures and to some statements from previous years. So, for example, we now have some in-year budget monitoring. So, auditors have previously suggested that on at least 3 occasions we bring actual budget monitoring from the in-year budget to the authority. So, of course, even though it feels a bit unnatural to be looking at the current year when the primary focus of the report is on the forward year, this seems like the most natural place to bring it. There's also now a capital programme that you'll see for the first time. There's a formal declaration on the adequacy of estimates or assumptions in terms of the budget setting process. And also I've structured things in slightly different order. So the MTFP comes at the end rather than at the beginning, where it tries to bring all things together. So going through the report, it is quite long, but I'll still try and draw out the key elements from within that if I can. So the introduction just reminds us of where we are and some of the efforts that we've gone to in setting the budget for this year. Section 2 and Appendix 1 shows the budget monitoring statement. So this gives us the for the current financial year. So this gives us the opportunity to highlight with members any issues that have arisen since we took the revised budget with you in month 6. And as it turns out, there are some issues that have come to light, which will be interesting for you all. So I think there's going to be a small underspend on the FIPL budget from admin. There's going to be some overspend from development management due to the cost of employing external consultants. And there are some significant costs in the long-running planning dispute that will be met in year. And now, when we talk about the reserves later, I'll show members where those impact upon reserves. The other thing to mention, of course, in the great tradition of report writing, there's important things that have arisen in year since the report has finalised. So one of those is the 440,000 from DEFRA. So that will be received in the current financial year. And obviously, if we'd have known a week earlier, then in section 2, I would have been referring to it then as well. But that'll be that will be sort of determined how that gets allocated at outturn when we look across the board and see what the pressures are and see what where the situation is with the reserves, and then we can make a formal decision on how that money is allocated then. So section 3 and appendix 2 relate to the core budget for the next financial year, for 23-24. So this is the ongoing services that we use to deliver services such as rights of way, planning, and education services. Members will be aware that it was quite a long and complicated process in getting a budget set for this year. There were almost £300,000 of savings targets that we had to meet, which for an organisation of this size was very challenging. 3.3 lists the way that we achieved the balanced budget for this year. So that refers to, so in particular, we are now budgeting for the capital contributions from the county councils, the capital contributions So the revenue budgets have effectively been reduced for rights of way, but the money has been replaced from what was one-off capital contributions. Those contributions have now been formalised, and we're planning that we receive it on an ongoing basis. You can also the bullet points also list the other changes that have been brought through, and I will draw your attention to the fact that one of those savings that we've used in this year to achieve a balanced budget is only one-off, so it's not going to be available in future years. That, of course, relates to interest received. The other key thing to mention is that we've been concerned for a little while about the results of the pension fund revaluation, but the results have come through. In essence, the deficit has halved, so we've gone from paying 150,000 a year to paying 75,000 a year for the pensions deficit, but the contribution rate for existing staff has increased. So overall, we're about back where we were to start with. Although it wasn't bad news in the sense that it could have been very painful and it could have been a lot more expensive, and it hasn't been. We're now 93% funded rather than 84%, which we were 3 years ago. Section 4 and Appendix 3 details the programme's partnerships and contributions to reserves. So this is the one-off contributions of revenue to meet particular pressures or priorities, and they're listed within Woodland. They're listed within 4.3. The first of which is Woodland, so there's further spend there on ash dieback, and the suggestion is that further budgetary allocations will still be needed. So it's worked quite well in that we haven't had to find a large lump of money up front, but there has been a regular stream of additional funding of money that Woodlands has need to clear trees affected by ash dieback. Yeah, and the other bullet points details those other pressures which we're showing. 4.4 also shows the changes to reductions to the discretionary programmes, and you'll see that for tourism and for the Exmoor Hill Farming Network, we're still able to support them, but that is at a lower level than previous years. So the capital programme, this is a new section that members wouldn't have received previously. So this is the Appendix 4 and Section 5 for the capital programme. So this shows existing capital approvals. So this is ones where members have have decided to support capital schemes at previous authority meetings. So that reminds us all of what the existing live schemes are that we're delivering currently. It also lists new schemes that members are being asked to approve as part of setting the budget in this year, and those are listed in 5.2. The capital programme will also, what I'm drawing to your attention there is those capital schemes that will be funded from capital and haven't been referred to elsewhere within the report. So where they are capital but are funded from revenue, you'll have seen them in the programmes and partnerships section, but the schemes being brought to your attention here are capital schemes that will be funded from capital. And this is only possible because of the member decision at February to look to sell particular assets where we can reinvest those proceeds in the estate. Section 6 shows the capital investment strategy. This is a formal obligation that we have to undertake, which shows our approach to capital management and how we invest and how we approach making investment decisions. Section 7 and Appendix 5 shows our existing level of reserves. So one of the formal declarations is the adequacy of reserves, and I'm happy to say that I do consider that the level of reserves are adequate for our purposes currently. There are a couple of significant changes that are taking place, so the headline draw from reserves for this year could be potentially quite high. You can see this in two different ways. There's the planned, programmed take from reserves that we know all about. There just happens to be quite a lot of those in years, and this refers to the Estates Reserve Dunster Action Plan, or Environmental Resilience, or National Park Centre Spend to Save, and that's fine, that's programmed, that's anticipated. But there also are going to be some large take from reserves based upon pressures and priorities that have arisen in year, and those are the ones we referred to earlier. When you look at the big take from reserves in this year because of the issues that are arising, so that's the long-running planning dispute, and also the cost of external consultants in development management. And that will be key. So to restore, so we'll be looking so if we do take from contingency to meet those pressures, we'll be looking to replace those as soon as possible, and it could well be that the 440,000 from DEFRA is a source we use to replace those. So Section 8 brings together and Appendix 6 brings together the medium-term financial plan. So this looks at the core services and programmes and partnerships, and it looks at it rather just on a one-year basis, but on a 5-year basis. And this gives us the opportunity to identify trends that are emerging. So in terms of some of the key assumptions within the medium-term financial plan, we're not assuming any increases in national park grants at all for the whole period of the medium-term financial plan. We've got 2 more years of this settlement period, so then there's another 3 years after that. So it's a prudent assumption to say no further increases, but obviously it's very difficult to know, to estimate accurately or confidently what that's going to be. But it feels the most likely answer and the most prudent answer is to show no increase for 3 further years. In terms of other assumptions regarding income, there's some gradual increases for National Park Centre, for planning and for the Outdoor Education Centre. And the other key thing to draw to members' attention here is in 8.5, just to mention that in December we brought before you a list of changes to charging. It is thought that we're now looking for member approval as well for the National Park to be able to recover all reasonable charges associated with the preparation of Section 106 agreements and other professional advice. So even though we're not building into the budget here any income from that source, now is thought to be the best time to seek member approval to make that change, and staff are available to answer any further questions on that if need be. And the only other key assumption to note with regards to the medium-term financial plan and income is regards interest balances. Obviously, there's been a 40 times increase in the base rates over the course of this financial year, which does lead to some very spiky numbers in terms of interest received. In terms of making a long-term planning assumption for interest, obviously we can have a rough idea of what our cash balances are going to be, but in terms of what interest rates are going to be over the next 2 to 5 years, well, it's anyone's guess really. So we have got some quite prudent numbers in there at the moment. In terms of the assumptions and the MTFP and expenditure, the key one there is that we're assuming 5% for the next financial year, for 23-24. We're assuming 3.5% for the following year after that, and then 2% for further years. Although indications are that for next year that will be on the light side because the employer's offer is already in excess of that. So yeah, we also show, so in MTFP programmes and partnerships, I'm just stating there that we're still setting aside £100,000 for one-offs. That's not a huge amount of money, but kind of the minimum that we would need to meet the one-off pressures, for example, in the estate or for fixed-term staff. So in terms of the overview, obviously there are still some concerning numbers in terms of the savings gap. So we achieved a £300,000 saving gap to achieve the budget for 23-24, but now when we set the 23-24 budget, there's still a gap of almost 200,000 for year 2, so for 24-25. And we've given you some ideas here about the various ways in which some indicative ideas of how those savings targets could move, where particular key assumptions are different. So, for example, in terms of national park grants or in terms of the staff pay awards, just to give an idea of how sensitive the numbers in the savings gap are to some movements in some key assumptions. And we also give some examples of how this savings target could be delivered, just to give a feel for the scale of the challenge. And my inclination is that it's probably going to be harder to achieve the savings targets for 24-25 than it was for the savings target for this year when we were looking at it 12 months ago. Just because as time goes on, life does get, the easier targets are met. Section 9 is the risk analysis. I've drawn more attention here to the pay awards and other inflationary pressures, because obviously at a key moment there's an underlying assumption, which is that the inflation rates will fall over the course of 23-24, which seems to be what we're getting told by the experts. But of course, if it doesn't fall as fast as we hoped, then obviously there'll be further inflationary pressures on pay and non-pay further within the MTFP. At the moment, they're assuming that inflation will fall to 4% over the course of the calendar year of 2023. But of course, if that doesn't, it will be a huge financial pressure for us. I also there's a new risk as well at the bottom of that table, just to say that, of course, in the situation at the minute, we seem to be increasingly reliant upon one-off funding sources. So that could be as regards money from DEFRA, or it could be sales of capital assets, or it could be from the result of legal action. So it's more just to say, well, it's a slightly different scenario in the sense that as long as these one-offs keep coming forward, then things are fine. But of course, we are more reliant on these one-offs than we were in previous years, where we were just had the assurance of the ongoing grant from DEFRA to keep us going. So that's the conclusion, really. So it lists where we are at in terms of the reserves and in terms of how we achieve the budgets. There's still a lot of work to do, but we're not in a bad situation. We've still set the budget without drawing on reserves for next year, and I don't think there's going to be many public authorities that can say that. So there we are, Chair.
Thank you, Gordon. Members, comments or questions? Any? Evening.
Yes, congratulations, Gordon, on a very complex exercise, which is very, very clearly set out, so there's no room for doubt on anything. I have a question and a couple of comments. One is, does the 440,000 have to be spent in the current financial year?
It doesn't have to be spent in this financial year. No, it's received in this year, but no, it doesn't seem to be tied into a particular objectives, and we can carry it forward. So
if next year or the following financial year you feel could be even more challenging, then might it be prudent to carry most of it forward?
Yes, that seems likely. I mean, in reality, practically speaking, it's quite difficult to spend it in this financial year now anyway. I mean, it'd be quite difficult for them to. So yes, in reality, it does appear to be utterly unring-fenced, apart from for national park purposes.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
The next point, and I'm sorry to hog it, everyone, but no one else put their hand up, so it seems okay. I've been closely monitoring the work of Visit Exmoor and representing the authority with them, and they've recently formed the independent board, so now I'm an observer. The contribution we make to them is now going to be £10,000. They are up against it as much as anyone else is, and I see that we're putting a contingency for a potential loss for Pinkery, and I just wondered whether that money, is it ring-fenced in an area, or is it possible if Visit Exmoor came up with a good proposition for partnership working, that they could actually draw down additional funds towards the end of the financial year, because they're interacting with a huge number of people, and they're also things like our More Care scheme benefit from Visit Exmoor being healthy and strong.
Gordon, you first.
Well, I mean, there will be an ongoing discussion with Visit Exmoor over the level of support we give them in future financial years. I wasn't aware that there was any possibility of having a conversation for the rest of this financial year, but we can speak to Dan James about that. We don't have lots of money sloshing around.
No, I realise that, and we've made that very clear to them over a long period, but they're doing very well, and they are engaging with a larger number of people, and the PR is increasingly good. And I just think for an extra £10,000, we might benefit ourselves, particularly from things like More Care.
I think like Gordon, we can't promise anything now in the public domain. Obviously, we'll have a conversation, but things are very tight, and we are watching every £1,000, as it were. So, but certainly have a conversation.
And finally, is the capital spend. We agreed at our last meeting that we were going to sell assets, and that was with great regret, but that money, I believe, should then be used for the best possible, put to the best possible use by the authority. And should we be looking at capital spend that's tied into, for example, rate of return for capital spent? Should we be looking at it a different way over the period of the medium-term plan? Certainly, should we be using it to underpin the authority and to assist us with our independence. And maybe that requires us looking again, even at things we may have approved, so that we can ensure that the capital that's going to be hard won, and some of it's going to be a one-off opportunity, gets used for the very best cause.
Thank you, Evelyn. Gordon?
The primary driver behind the sale of capital assets at the moment was about getting to a state where the estate wasn't dependent upon National Park grants to look after its buildings. And that's the key focus, that's the initial task. So the amounts that are shown here could only be a small proportion of the total assets that are received. In that instance, and there are a lot of other schemes that we're looking at, things like income generation and return on investment will be used as part of the decision-making process then, because there are all sorts of options that they are considering in using, because we do have other assets that are underutilised that could be used for commercial purposes or for social purposes.
Chairman, can I just say, organisations in the position we're in might put a moratorium on capital spend. You know, and it looks as if we are listing the things that we decided on, say, a year or two ago, and thinking, well, with the sale of these assets, we will be able to afford to do that, but maybe we can't afford to do that. That's just the point I was making. Sorry, Mike.
I think, yeah, very good point. Because of the speed in which things are changing at the moment, it will be important, won't it, to continually reappraise our spend, and also to ensure that public-facing side of it, the public fully understand. They see us making considerable capital investments. They might question why or how that decision was reached. So I think we have to be quite clear. Mike Kelly and Christine.
Yes. I was on. Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one point before I come on to the main point is I noticed 50k spent on development management consultants. Presumably we're in a position of full staffing now, so we'll not be having to spend out a similar sum. So that's a simple question. And I think the second point is just going back to what Ewan's been mentioning. If we look at 5.2, it talks about the 23-24 budget shows 3 internally funded schemes not referred to anywhere else within the budget papers. These items that need funding this year, and obviously we've not had an input to those proposals at all. I do notice there's 40k to improve the capacity, quality and functionality of the water system to the Pinkery Centre, for example. Is that, I mean, the question is that a prudent use in terms of the long-term return of that capital investment? Presumably that's been looked at, but we've not had an input to that. And given the uncertainty, for example, over the future of the centre, is this the sort of proposal, capital spend, that we should be making a decision on today? So that's a question for you, Gordon.
Well, most of the discussions with members in advance of the budget paper being drafted has been more concerned with some of the bigger issues, the areas around which services we may or may not be able to support. So apologies if FAPAP and in the previous briefings there hasn't been as much attention as there could have been on these capital schemes. As it turns out, the capital schemes that have been presented before you, well, it's only actually 2 because the car park one is still to be determined effectively. But it's one that, in a sense, whatever happens with the Pinkery Centre afterwards, it's not going to be effort that's wasted, because being able to guarantee a good, clean water supply is, however the building is used in future, is still going to be a scheme that's worthwhile.
So, sorry, just to come back on that. So that means whatever its future, that investment would not be would evaporate, so to speak. We will realise that investment in the sense of whatever happens to the Pinkery Centre. It will not be money that's been wasted, essentially.
I don't think it'd be money that will be wasted. No, whether you would ever get the full equivalent of that, if you sold it, well, I couldn't answer that question. But no, but it's certainly in terms of utility of the building and in terms of the ability to use it for different purposes. I don't think it's ever going to be a scheme that will be wasted.
Thank you, Gordon. I've got Christine, Francis.
Yes, we have mentioned Pinkery a couple of times, Gordon. I'm just wondering whether or not you've got any, I don't know if I've missed it, the bookings for Pinkery this year, post-COVID and obviously things trying to get back to normal, are we where we hope to be? And just have you got an eye to how that is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, this is the best year ever. So
Right.
it has bounced back, and they are looking to get full value out of
Yeah.
it. It's still been slightly disrupted, not by COVID, but because there's capital works taking place, which you'll know
Yeah.
about, the decarbonisation stuff.
Yeah.
So, but just the only other thing to mention about Pinkery, and in terms of Evelyn's point from previously as well, the reason why we've maintained the 20,000 provision for Pinkery and not reduced it as we have for others is just because there's been some big increases in staff on costs this year. So you
Yeah.
think we've had 2 years of very big staff pay awards
Yeah.
and the increase in the pension contribution rates. Now, for all other services, they've had budget to replace that with, effectively. But obviously, as a trading unit, they haven't had any support to meet those additional costs, so they've had
Right.
to meet it themselves, which is why I had to keep that provision in place. But no, the numbers are better than ever.
Oh, good.
And hopefully the decarbonisation work will reduce ongoing costs as well.
Yeah, yeah. So you feel comfortable with the bookings at present, and hopefully they might pick up again as times get a bit easier, because...
Yeah, well certainly in terms of pure gross income, it's much higher than it's ever been before.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gordon. Francis, please.
That's it. Yeah, I had a fit this morning when I was making the papers read to me as a way of making sure I really concentrated. I had a fit when we talked about commercial developments to return to provide a return and other local authorities, and thought, oops, and then realised he was saying we haven't done it and we're not going to. Am I right? We're not going to invest significant amounts in commercial developments to generate returns to provide additional resources.
Yeah, if that's the capital investment strategy you're referring to, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's 6.1. It comes up at 6.1 and 6.4. Just reassure me that you're not going to go and buy a business unit in Nottingham.
No, there'll be no Cornish pasty factories or battery plants in Newport.
Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I'm on the same lines with other people about capital spend and capital programmes and input into them, which feels in our straitened circumstances really important. And I also want a little bit of. I have not gone through the scheme of delegation, so you've put me right. A little bit concerned that members will have, as is 5.5, will have a full transparency on the final accounting and funding decisions regarding capital spend. In other places, a capital strategy is developed, capital approvals are made, but spending decisions are also come and have to be made. So approving a budget does not approve the spend. Is that the case here?
Approving the budget doesn't formally determine the accounting treatment of it. That's what we're saying
No,
here.
I don't mean the accounting treatment, the decision to spend the money.
No, you're making the decision to spend the money today. What 5.5 refers to is the fact that the accounting treatment may change in month 12 when we look again at certain schemes. It might not be obvious until the scheme's been completed. When it comes to things like roof repairs or adits and mines, it's only once the scheme's actually been completed that you can actually make that accounting decision whether it's...
That's different. That's quite different, and I absolutely understand that bit. But in approving this budget, we are approving this actual spend, and that feels a bit alarming at this stage. There are a couple of other things that I slightly want to mention. One is I think the Dunster scheme reserve is actually not our money. That's right, Chris, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. So how much of our reserves are actually other people's money, and are we really sure that we know what is other people's money? That's one question. And the other question is the little bit, and I can't now find the right place, where we've moved from what we agreed, which was that we will make a charge for pre-app advice, to cost recovery rather unspecified on Section 106s and liabilities and so on. And I think we ought to be thinking about that a bit more. It probably is the right thing to do, but I think we ought to be thinking about it and actually understanding more of what it is that we're being asked to decide. So those are my areas of concern.
I'll ask Dean to answer that following one, the final one there, if that's okay. But in terms of those other two, so are you concerned then that you're approving capital spend where the receipt hasn't been brought in yet? Is that the concern?
No, I'm concerned that we're actually saying, yes, this is the capital programme we would like to do, and we've set the budget aside, that's fine. Are we actually going to spend the money? That's another decision. And that's how I'm used to it working. Yeah.
Well, that is, yeah, I'm sorry if you'd have liked more visibility on that.
This is the budget setting meeting. What we need more is when we get to the point where there's a decision actually to spend the money, to come and talk to us about actually spending this money, or whether we return it to the budget.
Sarah, you'd like to?
Okay, I think what members are asking for, Gordon, is a bit more clarity about why, because we've only got 2 or 3 lines, and perhaps more information about why we need to spend the money, and is this a wise use of spend? Okay, and we can do that.
When we're approving a programme.
Yeah, if that's what members would like.
Whether we want to spend the money.
Yeah, and of course these are estimates, so a bit more detail nearer the time.
Yeah, we could certainly so for those in 5.2, the items to be funded from capital spend, if you'd want more information on those, and so not included as part of this budget, but we bring them back to you at a later
at a later date when we can decide whether or not we're going to authorise this expenditure.
Feel that they want more information before they can make that decision.
We want to make the decision. We need to make the decision.
Yeah. Mike.
Well, it appears if that is the concern, it might be that a decision on those particular items is deferred. So it's part of the recommendation. So we can
in the budget. We're not happy to say that you can write a check.
Andrea, first.
Well, this has sort of gone on from what I was going to say. I wasn't going to say anything then I thought, hang on. So I think what the problem is that we don't know if this is the best spend of the capital receipts with whatever else might be going on. I don't know, new windows somewhere or something. I think that's, am I right?
Yes.
Evelyn? Yes? So I just wanted to say, I was on the right track. So you're right, we need to defer this bit. But we don't have, because we don't know the whole picture about everything, there's no member input to making a decision about what would be the best decision to make about these often one-off capital receipts, which should be underpinning the revenue budget. So we shouldn't be doing anything nowadays that we don't use capital to underpin our revenue budget, which we know is going to be even more challenging in the future. I think I've summed it all up.
Yeah. Evelyn.
Yes, Chairman, just very briefly, this is the first time that we've had such a detailed capital budget, and I think it's brilliant, and I think it's the way to go. But because we have queries about the process, it's the process that's the issue, I think. Would it not be sensible to approve the budget bar the plan, bar the capital element, and defer it, and actually have some more discussion, so that we can get the actual rules of engagement correct? Because it is the first time we've done it.
Yep.
Can I come back?
Yes, Gordon.
Because I think I meant to say this. Another point I think that this is now bringing to light is that we probably are missing out on having that separate subcommittee that dealt with finances and capital stuff, which of course I've sat on for donkey's years. Yes, and you, and Francis. So I think that again this comes back to a governance question. Is it right that we're having so many of these meetings where probably we need to have more now going down this route, financial meetings and resources meetings and policy meetings rather than us all sitting here? Because we're now doing it here, aren't we?
We are, and this is the format that we should be doing this in. We are later during the members' forum looking at governance issues, and I think this was the reason for those issues being there. in an understanding that with a change in the way in which some of this is working, and with a different way in which we look at capital receipts and capital investment, there is a need to have a broader discussion. Is that correct, Gordon?
Yeah. So, well, apologies from me as well. I mean, it's the case that, I suppose most of the deliberations with members in advance of the budget being set were on those big service type issues. So if we didn't spend as much talking about some of the capital investment decisions, then certainly I'm sorry for that, and we'll try and do better in future. But it's not. But I would defend. But I do think we do give members a great deal of visibility. So I'm sure in your roles in other public bodies, you probably wouldn't get this level of visibility. So it's the fact that you've got this visibility which allows you to answer those questions. And there was the other question from
Dunster.
Yeah, in terms of so. The money that you see is based upon funds that we control. That's the key principle behind it. So the only money that you don't see, that we don't control, is some deposits that we have from commercial properties.
Why I was slightly puzzled by the mention of the Dunster money, because that's not our money.
Well, we do control that money. So it is our money in the sense that we control it. So that's the explanation. So it's the authority that would. Yeah. Yeah, it's the principle is of control in terms of so whether or not.
So do we in fact control the spend of the money?
We are back again to discussion we're going to have later around governance. So I think as long as we're aware that is the situation and there is need. Dean was going to answer a question. I can't for the life of me remember what the question was. I don't know whether Dean can. Right.
But we've got added in here. Now, added in here is the decision to make other charges in relation to planning, and I think we ought to understand and discuss them before we make that decision.
Dean.
Okay, brilliant. So, first of all, I probably need to apologise as well. It should have been in the charging paper that came in December, but clearly, as part of our ongoing processes around development management, from time to time we have to enter into Section 106 agreements. And as a matter of course, information we have around that, they cost between about £750 and about £1,500. I would put a massive caveat to that, because that depends on the amount of time that a solicitor has to take and officers have to take. So it can vary, but that gives you a general ballpark figure. And it's something that for a long time we have absorbed within budgets, and we have taken that burden on. Now, I have to say we are, I think, probably the only planning authority in the country that still do that. And I've had a couple of discussions recently with some firm solicitors who have almost laughed and looked shocked at the fact that we still do that. Because of the discussions we're having, it felt prudent and appropriate to therefore look to recoup money to the public purse when we are carrying out that work, and for the applicant to be paying direct to a solicitor. So that's the reason behind it. As I said, it isn't ideal that it's in the paper that it's in, but we wanted to give it some visibility to members so you can understand and hopefully have the discussions we're having now. So that's the theory behind it.
I mean, Section 106 we understand.
Yeah.
Section 106 we understand what they are. Viability assessments are mentioned. What else is there? Are we going to? What other charges are we thinking of? What is covered in this? And is there a thought as to whether, in fact, these things could be commissioned by the applicant? What sort of arrangements are being made?
So certainly in terms of viability assessments, again, because of its in the interest of an applicant, we would expect that a appointed specialist appointed by the authority that an applicant should be paying for that, and that feels reasonable. Other things such as whether we need advice around agricultural an agricultural expert, or we needed to outsource for ecology, they would have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And as a general rule of thumb, I think it's fair to say we would be less likely to look to reimburse the public funds for those type of works, but there may be instances where we feel it's appropriate to do so. But that's why the report talks largely around the Section 106s and viability, because that's the ones, as a general rule of thumb, we will be looking to recoup the public purse around that.
Thank you very much. My question for all the colleagues, and I'm terribly sorry, as I've talked to Robin, I'm going to have to disappear from the meeting for a little bit just in a minute, is this something we should be deciding in the budget paper, or should it be a separate decision, as we did with the other charging questions? And I think, thank you very much. It's a question I'll leave you with, and I'm very sorry I've got to...
Thank you, Francis. Dean, just one comment around that. Sure, this is on cost recovery. There will be no profit element within any of this. It is just on cost recovery for costs incurred by the authority to produce.
Yeah, so Section 106s, for example, they will go direct to the solicitor who is making that draft, so they could go to their own solicitors, or it may be that we sort of say, well, here's a solicitor firm we know we've worked with previously, and they may have some of our templates, and that might be able to keep costs down for them, and they direct there. We're not involved in that exchange other than checking the Section 106 to make sure it has all the information that we require. Viability is slightly different, and yes, that's just cost recovery. That's going through a process, by and large, in terms of tendering for a number of interested parties, and then with the applicant we would look to agree which one we would go for and what was the appropriate cost.
Thank you, Dean. I just thought needed that to be on the record for now. I have 2 or 3 other questions. I think Linda and Jeremy. Fran. Jeremy again. So, Linda first.
Yeah, it's a couple of things. One, I understand that people are concerned that we don't have the detail, but I'm even more concerned that we've got a real pressure on staff at the minute, and I would be really worried if we get a lot of these detailed reports taking up staff time to prepare and committee time to look at. So if we are going to come back and look at things in detail, I think we need to have a figure below which we're not interested. So looking at some of the past approvals, I really wouldn't want us to be discussing a £12,000 photocopier, but we might want to be discussing £50,000 something else. So I think we need to put a fairly high figure that things may come to committee. And then the other question I have, looking at the old Appendix 4, the older pre-existing approvals, quite a lot of capital approvals are from revenue. Is there, if we do get a massive amount of money from the sale of Weir Cleave or something that we lease exit, is there a possibility then that we could transfer a capital receipt and claw back the revenue?
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be an aspiration there, if that was possible. I mean, I don't know if we're about to get vast amounts of capital receipts anyway, but there might be opportunities. I mean, I think Addicts and Mines, is a good example of something that is pure estate cost and should be funded from an estate capital receipt. So I think that would be a good example. But of course, we don't have any ongoing capital funding stream. So historically, it's always been from revenue. But just in terms of your earlier point as well, I mean, I do think we've given members a lot of visibility, because what you've seen with all capital schemes is a specific authority project, is a specific authority report, and there can't be many authorities where members would get that amount of detail. But if you think of Weir Cleave or White Rock Cottage, we don't have that many actual proper capital projects, but where they have existed like that, you generally get a specific report, rather than things being included within a broader report.
Thank you, Gordon.
And that,
yes,
perhaps in the governance this afternoon, the informal debate, we could look at a threshold.
Yeah. I think that was the opportunity for this afternoon, that we were looking at some of that as we move forward. Because we are moving into a slightly different arena with what's happening within the authority and its run and so on. So, Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine was just a practical issue. I would have no problem at all authorising 20,000 at Tile Steps and at Pinkery Centre 40,000 if I knew that the alternative was it would be shut down because the water wasn't clean enough, for example, if that is the case. So if it's for a filtration system or whatever, that is a fine justification, but it would be nice just to have one line saying it's because, and it'd be easier for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Fran?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's what I was going to say about an explanation for each one of these. I've seen MTFPs before, and there's usually a dialogue about each scheme, so that would be helpful, because from my recall, I haven't seen, and I was mainly going to talk about the capital schemes of 240,000, that I don't recall seeing these or approving these, but I was unsure what level of approval we have and what is delegated, so that was part of my misunderstanding. If we approve it as a budget, that's fine, but we haven't seen the individual items. What would be the timescale impact if you have to bring all these items back to us, and would that impact on the future? Because if you're kind of thinking, right, we're going to go ahead with it, that we're going to approve the tar steps borehole, have you set up a plan with what the work that's going to be done? In your minds, you're kind of thinking, well, this will start in June or this will start in September, because I'm sure we're going to approve it. So if that is already in your thinking, if you've then got to bring this back to us in May, and then you've got to renew contracts, does that impact on any of these thoughts and approvals? Thank you.
Well, I thought the next natural opportunity to bring them back to members would be in July, which was when I next bring a waft of finance papers before you. But if it was urgent, then it could certainly be in April or May again. Whether there's an opportunity for FAPAP to sit and to look across the board and to look at other capital pressures, it may be a bit further on than that, but certainly I suppose July would be the next most obvious place to take them. And yeah, I mean, I think people are keen to start delivering these projects. I mean, the tar steps, the public facilities there did run dry, so the facilities had to be closed on a few occasions last year when it was dry. So it was partly towards getting to a point where we keep them open the whole time. But certainly it's entirely reasonable if members want more debate in advance. Then yeah, certainly we can do that.
Just come back on that. I think for some of these, I mean, it makes common sense. I mean, we want to attract tourists to tar steps. You're getting funding from the car parking, etc., and it's open spaces. And this is the time of year that you would want all those facilities in place. And if we get another dry summer, then you know, people need to wash their hands when they use the toilets, etc., for health and safety reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Jeremy? Yeah, absolutely. Can you press a button on your?
Yep. Thank you, Chairman. This is interesting, isn't it? And I think I'm not sure I can add much to what my colleagues have said, and I'm certainly supporting Andrea and Mike over there, and others in the room. I've got a question, but I've got other stuff now, so I'll just go through it. And Jeremy, absolutely, tar steps, the bullet points. Tar steps, borehole, it tells us why it's needed, but the Pinkery Centre doesn't. And a little more information would have, you know, it's essential to have good water supply, isn't it? Whether we're keeping it, renting it out, selling it, it's a good investment if it's needed, but we don't have that information. So just park that, Chairman. I'm just thinking what happens at district and other places. We allocate a capital and we agree it in a budget, but it comes back later to Strategy and Resources or the Cabinet that it's going to be spent or increased or decreased or whatever, so that we do get another look at it. Not sure it's necessary in this case exactly, but I think Andrea highlighted perhaps a governance vacuum. Not a serious one, but a governance vacuum. My real question was earlier on, relying on cash grants, random or occasional cash grants. It's great to have it, but very difficult to plan our operation on it, isn't it? And that leads me to wonder, and Andrew was saying that money, and here, that the capital grant should be backing up a revenue budget. Completely agree with that. Can we do that without falling foul of government saying, well, you haven't used it, so you don't need it, and then not giving it to us next time? That was the brunt of my question, really. I'll leave it there, Chairman.
Thank you. Comments, Gordon?
Yeah, well, we're always mindful of sort of grant conditions whenever they're received. So, you know, there is money that has to be spent in this year. So the removing barriers, for example, the accessibility one, that has to be spent in this year, and the people delivering that are very, very mindful of that. So we do notice these things closely, and we're, you know, in the last few days we've had notification from DEFRA, so we are, you know, currently poring over those conditions exactly to see the conditions and the reporting elements of it and all those sort of things.
I didn't expect a different answer. I just thought it was worth just bringing it out and getting that out.
To be honest, around like 440,000, although it was in the press and announced last week, I did speak to Sarah and did say it not to discuss with members until we were sure of the conditions attached to it, until Gordon had them, rather than just on the basis of a press release sent out. So that was my reasoning at that time.
Thank you.
Rather than contacting everyone. Marcus, can you press the button?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's one of those cases where you miss a couple of meetings and you think, oh, did I miss something? But actually, I'm not really as concerned as maybe other members are. I mean, when I first saw the 40,000 for water, I thought, oh, a bit like Mike. But then actually, 10 minutes later, you think about it and think, well, what do you mean we haven't got good water? And there's got to be a point where you set a budget and you trust people that they're going to use that budget sensibly. And if someone says we need clean water in Pinkery, we trust the officers to get it right. And there's got to be a point where we do that. We don't want to be dealing with every we don't want to be a parish council worrying about where they're buying the milk from. As at one town council meeting I went to recently, they were complaining where the milk was being bought from. So I think we need to we need to be sensible like that. And you look at the other two, the Tarscapes borehole, 30,000 pounds, it doesn't take too much of a thought process on that. And I'd like to be a bit worried about everything coming forward to a separate decision paper on that. And again, what I was interested in was, again, like the 106, well, actually it didn't need much. What do you mean we don't charge already? Times have changed. Now's maybe the time to change. Should that have been in charging paper in December? Well, I wasn't here in December, so I have to trust that the members who were there then and the officers there were then have made that decision. What I was interested in, and of course, we talked about one-off grants and things like that. We talked about one-off income, and there was a couple. You slipped in a legal thing there, and I'm conscious we're in a public meeting, so I don't want to dwell on that, but that was quite interesting, because actually you can look at one-offs and think, well, they're one-offs, but somewhere along the line you sometimes know that there might be a one-off coming in the future, a bit like you alluded to there, and how we deal with them, and maybe that's one for later, because of course we had a couple of, what were they called? I'm trying to think of the word when they were left by somebody in their will. Legacy. Well, I didn't want to say legacy, because I thought it was a different thing. So we have things like that as well coming forward, so it's just having a sense of what might be there, and I know some people who just had a one-off income that they've known might be coming for 12 years, but it's taken 12 years. So what do we think's in the in the pot? But I would like to agree with what Evelyn said about investing in the future, and I do. And I have to, I sit on Visit Exmoor as well. I think I should be sitting on Visit Somerset as well. So I declare that interest, but I do think we need to look at certain things there that you could class as an investment rather than a revenue cost. It's a difficult line. They need to, all these bodies that we contribute need to be able to wash their own face, so to speak. But sometimes we don't want to, for the sake of saving a few bob, be in a detriment for the future. I think I probably covered everything I wrote down there, so I'll leave it at that for a minute. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus. Anything to respond to there, Gordon?
Not particularly, if that's okay.
I've got a few comments made from sort of debate here, actually. There's quite a lot mentioned around the project type approach to some of our funding. Just have to bear in mind always that any of those project program type bases will need revenue support to deliver them, because unless there is the staff there with sufficient revenue, sufficient time and sufficient resources, you cannot bid into any funds and deliver them at all. So it's just a mind that they're mindful that there's always a cost attached to a programme type approach. Just a quick comment as well around the boreholes. Absolutely understand the reasoning, especially after a year like this year, and if we're likely to be going into a more interesting seasonal approach, there's a fair chance that water will become an increasing problem. I'm talking to a couple of borehole companies. I know they said they've bored more boreholes in the last 12 months and probably in the last 5 years for that reason. Just to bear in mind, though, there is a cost to running a borehole. Borehole pumps are not cheap things to run. It's uninteresting to look at the costs you'd attributed it there, because I've just installed a boreholes and I know exactly how much mine cost me. And I think I had a good deal. Is probably the best thing to say there. What's probably the one part of the medium-term financial plan is that effectively new section within it that's brought the most debate, Gordon, and that's that capital spend. I think that's highlighted what we knew already, and because of the timescales involved, it's been impossible to have the governance discussion and put in place that side before we could have the discussion around some of these capital items. I think that's really unfortunate that it happens to have come that way round. From my point of view, the capital items there are not massively significant, but I think in future what we have to be aware of is there does need to be a change in how these are brought forward and the discussion way in which they're discussed. I think that's probably something that has come out, and I think most people would agree that's what came out of the debate. It's around that the capital spend, and it will be an important one, especially if we're likely to be selling assets from the estate and looking to reinvest that capital money. Have to be absolutely clear in how that money's been spent and what its value is. And I think Evelyn's point was actually well made, in that we have to look at what the potential return on that investment of capital is likely to be as well. The bit buried in there around the section 106 is, I think there's inevitability around needing to go down that route. What it has shown is if we try and do the planning side on a budget, we end up in intense difficulties, as the last year or two has shown. If we're going to do it properly, professionally and on time, it has to be funded and funded properly. And there's a real balance to be worked there, because most people, in my experience dealing with planning, want a result one way or another fairly quickly, not something that's delayed for an inordinate amount of time. And the only way you can do that is for the appropriate investment behind it and not bury costs. So fully understand that side of it, really. So with that in mind, looking at the three capital investments there, and we are going to have a presentation on some of the car parks after this meeting in a members' forum. I would suggest to you that the capital investments that have been mentioned are looking to support the revenue of the authority. Water is going to be a difficult one. Last year was absolutely clear that water is going to be a complex issue in the future. Even Pinkery in the short term or long term that we might have it. And I think we do need some more clarity over that discussion before putting considerably more money in there. I think because that investment would take us very close to the annual investment in Pinkery, average investment anyway in this year. I think we need to be able to ensure that we have a governance process in place that gives opportunity to discuss these approaches before the next rain comes. However, just insurance, it ran short of water last year, didn't it, Gordon, at Pinkery? Am I right or not?
Yeah, I mean, there are pressures there, you know, 'cause, yeah, especially when you have adult groups all returning out.
Because obviously what we can't do is have an outdoor centre that's led with a crowd full of people there and no clean and safe water supply that's adequate. So we've kind of got a chicken and egg situation with this in the short term, if that's understood. In the longer term, I think there are some questions on process which are really important and have to be dealt with. And would you comment there, Mike?
I would. That's a very good summing up, Chairman. Yeah, I think we need to be pragmatic about this. There might be some issues about the process, sorry. But I'm satisfied with what Gordon said. Thank you for the clarification. and looking at the Appendix 4 in terms of the capital programme, I'm happy with all the items as they're set out. So my initial concerns about deferring that, I'm suggesting that's no longer necessary. We need to move on, and we need to make a decision. I listened to what Linda said about that particular point, and I'm satisfied with all the detailing that's now being put forward in Appendix 4 as clarified by Gordon. Thank you.
Thank you. Was Stephen?
Thank you, Chairman. It has been a very interesting and full debate, but I think we've probably reached the point where we can deal with the recommendations, so I'm going to move them as printed on page 1 of the item.
Is that seconded? Members, can I have all those in favour? Thank you. That is unanimous. That is unanimous, but I think it was well noted, Gordon, that actually as we move forwards, we need to look closely at the approach taken on capital spend to ensure this debate should not be necessary as an authority paper. It should be held before. Thank you, Gordon, very much. To move on, we haven't finished with you yet, have we? Item 8, the Treasury Management Strategy.
Thank you, Chair. So 3 times a year we bring before you the discussions of Treasury Management. So this is where we set out what our policies will be and how we manage our cash over the course of the next financial year. There are some changes to bring to your attention. So as part of the transition from Somerset County Council to Somerset Council, they're no longer offering the com fund, so that quasi-legal structure that separated out cash balances. But they have kindly offered to still manage our cash for us. And the good news is there's no additional risk. There's still a single counterparty, so we're not exposed to any of the sort of market turbulence or the risks to the principal. And it's the case that the charge is less than it has done in previous years, and it's slightly more efficient because we don't have to sort of invest or disinvest from the confront on a monthly basis. So the changes are highlighting the key change to members, but it doesn't introduce any new risks or any new expense. So the rest of the paper you'll be familiar with. It includes our prudential indicators, and obviously as we don't borrow, these are all set at low or practically zero, and our anticipated returns and the like. So those are the key issues for members, I think, Chair.
The question, did I hear you say we have this report 3 times a year?
You have reports on Treasury Management 3 times a year, which we're obliged to do. And
seems a lot, doesn't it?
It is, but that's part of the debate over governance as well. Yeah.
Members, any other questions?
I'm happy to move, Chairman.
Thank you. All right, Stephen, seconded. All those in favour? Unanimous. Judy, thank you very much. And Gordon. Item 9.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the final paper from me today involves formally setting out the scheme of member allowances for the next financial year. It's a continuation of the current policy, so the increase to members' allowances will shadow the increase in staff pay that's agreed. This paper does not suggest any changes to the structure of allowances either, although obviously there could be changes that are brought about at some point in the future based upon the conclusions of those debates around governance and committee structure and those kind of things. But no, it's a continuation of existing policies. Members will be familiar with the allowances that are available.
Thank you, Gordon. Members. Andrea?
Happy to move, Chairman.
Thank you. Seconded, Mike. All those in favour? That is everyone. Unanimous. Thank you very much, Gordon. And we'll move to item 9. Any other business for urgency? I've not been notified of anybody. Anything, sorry. So at that point, I will thank you all for your attendance at the meeting and declare the authority meeting closed.